If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
Verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Welcome to our program. I'm Larry Wessels with the Research and Education Foundation. This is a joint production between Peaceway Productions of Austin, Texas, and the Research and Education Foundation. And I want to thank you for being with us here today. Today we have a very special topic concerning creation science versus the myth of evolution. Hold on to your hats. You're going to see some information here that you might possibly not see anywhere else. And I think it'll be a very informative show. If you have friends or neighbors that may be interested in this topic that we'll be discussing today, please call them right now. And with that, I'll now introduce my co-host for this show, Director of Peaceway Productions, Dale Deloney. Dale, it's great to have you here.
Great to be
here. And of course, our very special guest, Dr. Michael Gerard from the Institute of Creation Research.
Good to be here.
Yes, and Dr. Gerard, I'd like you to, for our viewing audience right now, kind of give a little background information about yourself and tell us a little bit about ICR.
ICR, the Institute for Creation Research, is out of San Diego, California. They're a group of scientists who do research and provide scientific evidence that shows that the Bible is absolutely true, especially those first 11 chapters of Genesis. I lectured with them several years ago, and I do independent work now, and ICR is just the premier creation science institute in the world and in America. If you write to this program, they'll give you information on how to contact ICR. Would encourage you to get on their mailing list. They will never beg for money. They send out monthly a newsletter with some technical information and some non-technical information. They keep you informed of the various programs that the ministry does, and they make available various books and different resource materials, videotapes and audio tapes that really provide overwhelming evidence to show that evolution is false. And I'd like to share two of the books that have really meant a lot to me. Dr. Duane Gish's book, Evolution Challenge of the Fossil Record, was the first book I read. So often when we talk to evolutionists, they tell us that the best evidence to prove evolution is found in the fossil record. Well, I got Dr. Gish's book, and I found that the fossil record overwhelmingly disproves evolution. This book is thorough. Regardless of what level educationally you're at, you'll find a lot of good information. If you have a college background, it's particularly useful. If you don't believe it's true, do what I did. Go check the references. Excellent book. And the other book is written by Dr. Michael Denton, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. The reason why Dr. Denton's book is so good is because he is not a Christian, nor is he a creationist, but he provides overwhelming evidence to thoroughly demolish every aspect of evolution. The other thing he addresses particularly well is this idea about ape proteins being so similar to human proteins. He discusses that. He shows that that has nothing whatsoever to do with evolution, and he's qualified to do that. He's a PhD and an MD. He is a world-renowned molecular biologist, and he is very, very qualified to discuss that evidence. both of these books can be had from ICR. If you write to them, they'll be glad to send you a book list and provide that information. But these books are excellent.
And I'd also like to mention also another fine book that, as Dr. Gerard was mentioning books that meant a lot to him, this book meant a lot to me when I was a young Christian, Science and the Bible. I purchased this book within a month or two of my coming to know the Lord, and it just revolutionized my thought and thinking life and helped my Christian life, because it's hard to reconcile what your heart believes when your mind is believing along evolutionary lines. There's a conflict there. But Dr. Morris's book here, and he's also the president, I believe, of the Institute of Creation Research. He wrote this book, and it's a fine tool, a fine addition to anybody's library that would want to have this, and it'll help them tremendously on this whole issue of the Bible and creation and evolution and all those aspects. So I just wanted to get that plug in. Now with that, I want to now turn your attention to this continuing series that we've been doing here. This is program number 3 in our Creation Science versus the Myth of Evolution series. We have been working our way through a chart. We're trying to get through common questions people have that pertain to this whole field of creation science and evolution. And in the previous shows, we've worked our way through some of the points, but today we're going to try to work our way through a lot more points, hopefully a lot more than we passed in the first 2 shows. And in today's program, we're now, as I move to the chart, I'll remove this chart here. I'm going to go to a chart about key questions people ask. And people ask, well, what about this and what about that? And, you know, this creation stuff is a bunch of mythology, and you guys are a bunch of religious fanatics. Well, we're going to take a look at scientific evidence. Dr. Gerard's here, an expert in this field, and he will be answering these questions to help us better understand what are both sides of this issue. Because this is a main problem we have in our culture today, our society, is the kind of information Dr. Gerard is getting ready to present is the information that I think is mainly, as we've discussed in previous shows, suppressed in society, in the school system, in many theological seminaries, and many religions teach evolution. So, I mean, this is a concept that the evidence that Dr. Gerard will be giving us is a concept evidence and things that you just don't hear much of, but you're going to hear it today. So with that said, let me go right to the chart. We've already covered points 1 through 4 here on the chart. What about the pillars of the universe, fossils and living fossils, theistic evolution, and microevolution? And if you want to know more about those, call the cable company you're seeing this series on and ask them to replay shows number 1 and 2 that we've already broadcast, or contact our ministries for video copies. But you'll just have to wait till next time. We simply do not have enough time to go through these again. So we're going to pick up with point number 5 now. And I'm going to ask Dr. Gerard, what about amino acids, proteins, which are, I believe these are building blocks of life, and I think we have L-shaped, left-handed and right-handed, all that kind of good stuff. I'll let you talk about that. And how these pertain with an oxygen atmosphere, about the binding of amino acids and things of this nature. Now right now it doesn't mean anything to anybody, so I'm going to let you explain what these terse words mean and the ramifications thereof.
Okay. When we start talking about amino acids and proteins, what we really need are proteins, because those are the chemicals in our bodies and in every living system that does work. Those are the things that are absolutely essential to do things in the human body. You cannot live without proteins. They form the backbone of the various hormones, etc. They form muscle tissue, and they are important to form skeletal tissue and various things. They're the backbone of the immune system. So proteins are those chemicals, large molecules in the body that actually do the functions that make us alive. No proteins, no life. Proteins are made up of chemicals called amino acids. Now, the evolutionist absolutely requires that just by the laws of chemistry and physics, amino acids form, and those amino acids come together the exact same way they would in a living system to form a protein, and that those proteins eventually gather together and form a living organism. That is absolutely essential for the evolutionary scenario, but there's a lot of problems. All of us who have gone through a basic chemistry or biology course have been shown the experiment by Miller and Urey, in which they boiled some chemicals in a chemical reagent pot and then condensed them and shot electricity over them and collected in a trap some amino acids. We were told that that experiment proved that life could evolve from non-life. That experiment proved it could never happen. Let me explain why. When we talk about amino acids that are found in living organisms, in every single protein, every single living system, every single amino acid is a left-handed amino acid. Amino acids come in two types, left-handed and right-handed. And if you have just one right-handed amino acid in a protein, that whole protein is non-functional. When we go into the chemistry, when we look at a living system, let me start there, every single amino acid in every single protein is a left-handed amino acid, 100%. However, when we go into the chemistry laboratory and do what Miller and Urey did with their experiment, we always get a 50-50 mixture of left-handed and right-handed amino acids. And there is nothing that would make those left-handed amino acids line up with just left-handed amino acids. The laws of chemistry and physics would always produce a 50-50 mixture. Remember what we said? If you have even just one right-handed amino acid, that protein is non-functional. So even if we could get amino acids to come together to make proteins, they would be the wrong amino acids. And that is recognized by the evolutionists. I heard Dr. Stanley Argyll lecture at the University of New Orleans several years ago. And somebody asked him, Dr. Argyll, how do we overcome that problem of getting just left-handed amino acids? And Argyll said, son, that is the unsolvable problem. An unsolvable problem admitted by an evolutionist, and yet that's absolutely essential. The problem gets even more complex. You see, amino acids have to undergo an hydrolysis reaction in order to form proteins. The only problem is that if you just let amino acids sit by themselves, the laws of chemistry and physics allow the carboxyl group on the amino acid to react with the amino group, which is the wrong reaction. It's the wrong chemical bond. So we get amino acids coming together in a way that does not form protein. That's what the laws of chemistry and physics do. Now, in living systems, we have other proteins called enzymes that force the right reactions. We don't have that in just non-biological systems like Miller and Urey would propose. But there's another problem. There are many things that are necessary to make these amino acids. Methane, formaldehyde, different chemicals that Miller and Urey used in their experiment, ammonia. Those chemicals, if they are exposed to oxygen, would never, ever come together to form proteins. Oxygen destroys amino acids and the proteins they're trying to form, and oxygen would prevent the amino acids from forming the right reaction. The evolutionist is forced to believe that hundreds of, or rather billions of years ago, when life was beginning to evolve, there absolutely was no oxygen in the earth. If the oxygen was there, it would destroy the reactions. There's a problem. You absolutely need oxygen to prevent ultraviolet radiation, long-wave ultraviolet radiation, from destroying these molecules. Without the oxygen, you would destroy every one of the amino acids and all of the different chemicals, methane, ammonia, formaldehyde, that was necessary to make the amino acids. So you need the oxygen to make the amino acids, but the minute you have the oxygen, you destroy the amino acids. It's a classic catch-22. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You simply cannot win. And that's the oxygen dilemma, and it's well known to the evolutionists. Now, while they're forced to believe that somehow a miracle occurred and the laws of chemistry and physics were violated, they know very well that they cannot get this to occur as long as there's oxygen or non-oxygen. What they're forced to believe is that there was a period in the ancient Earth, billion years ago or so, however long ago they think evolution occurred, when there was no oxygen. There's a problem. And the problem is the evidence. When we look at the evidence, this is what we find. And let me quote from E. Dimroth and M.M. Kimberley, Canadian Journal of Earth Science, 1976. Quote, in general, we find no evidence in the sedimentary distribution of carbon, sulfur, uranium, or iron that an oxygen-free atmosphere has existed at any time during the span of geological history recorded in well-preserved sedimentary rocks. And that's what forced Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson to conclude Since living organisms and organic molecules need the protection from ultraviolet radiation provided by an ozone screen, yet the presence of oxygen prevents the development of such living systems and biological molecules, this would seem to constitute a catch-22 in the model. The evidence says that there's always been oxygen, but the oxygen would destroy everything that we're trying to make. Classic catch-22. Life from non-life simply could not occur, not because I say that, but because the laws of chemistry and physics demand it.
Very well said.
Well, I'd just like to add that when you, again, you have to explain, the evolutionists cannot explain how anything, how all that we see around us came out of nothing, and then he cannot explain how the random elements would acquire information, and amino acids is a far cry from a complex, information-filled living cell with a nucleus and a membrane. And you ask them, well, how did life come from non-life? We don't know that either. And then they try to say it was an accident. Well, you've just proved that it cannot accidentally, a time plus chance. Again, we don't agree with the time. There's over 100 dating methods that say we have a young Earth. They throw those out and go for that magic dust of time, because if they can add millions or billions of years, plus anything's possible, they'll say, then we can slip this by a person that doesn't know the facts that Dr. Gerard just mentioned, which are you cannot have amino acids forming even the basic protein accidentally.
And these are the basic building blocks of life.
They're absolutely essential. You cannot do without them, plain and simple.
Oh, very good.
That's right.
All right, now as time flies, let's move on to the next point. Mutations. What about mutations? Can't you have like ultraviolet rays and a fruit fly turns into a beetle or something like that, or you know, whenever you've all heard of it, somebody exposed to radiation and they may lose their hair or turn into somebody or get 3 hands or whatever it is. What about that?
They could become Spider-Man.
That's right. But you know, when we look at mutations, the key point is that even if you did form somebody with 3 hands, or even if you did form somebody with an extra nose or whatever, you would start with a man and end with a man. And that's what we notice with mutations. And here again, this is an area that we have gone out and done the experimental homework to determine whether or not mutations can cause evolution. And the answer has been overwhelmingly no. We've taken the fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster, and we've subjected that fruit fly to all sorts of mutations. We've hit it with X-rays and ultraviolet rays and chemicals and different things, bad hamburgers, and we've done all kind of different insults to this organism, and we get tremendous numbers of mutations. We get flies with no wings, and flies with double wings, and flies with double abdomens, and flies with no eyes, big flies, little flies, ugly flies. But we always start with a fly and end with a fly. The other thing we've noticed about mutations, most of them are fatal, nearly all or all of them are harmful. And if we let the mutated flies just allow them to breed with each other over several generations, they will go back to the basic fly. What the experimental evidence has shown is that mutations never, ever cause evolution, macroevolution, one kind of creature turning into a different kind of creature. That never occurs, and not because we say that, but because scientifically we've never observed it, and the experimental evidence overwhelmingly proves that. Just stress this again. Mutations never produce a different kind of creature, and that's what evolution requires. At one of the scientific meetings that was held in the late 1980s, a group of evolutionists gathered to discuss this issue of whether or not mutations could ever cause evolution. And when Roger Lewin wrote the review of this meeting for Science, he said, at the risk of doing harm to a very few people's position, the overwhelming answer was no. Mutations do not cause evolution, period. The evolutionists themselves are beginning to admit that.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, that was their only explanation. I mean, they got to have some way where a species could go from its, with its DNA code that reproduces after its own kind, which, goes with the Bible, what God said in the beginning, to somehow break out of that and become all the different species we see today.
But scientifically, and it's verifiable, each kind reproduces only after its own kind, and like a cat does not reproduce as an elephant.
And we already showed in the previous shows that there, in the fossil record, there are no missing links in any of the chains of species.
In the fossil record, there are missing links.
Well, there are missing links,
Yes.
but they've found no transitional forms, is what I mean to say.
Right.
And then if you had mutations that transferred, that somehow became better, then you should see transitional forms. You don't. So then I hear some of the scientists have gone to where one species just kind of leaps magically to another.
We'll get to that. That's coming up on the chart.
Okay, all right.
let's roll along here on point number 7. Man made in the image of monkeys, homology, because that's the study of similarities and things of that nature. And things that tie in with this are like the find of Johansen, I think the Lucy skeleton and so forth. And then we want to get into basically man's evolutionary tree. I'm talking about the Cro-Magnon man and the Java man and Piltdown man and all those kinds of men. And then, of course, another thing also would be ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
Right.
Hey, that's a mouthful. But anyway, this is kind of a vast subject here, so let's let Dr. Gerard give us some comments here.
Whole bunch of things. Let's start with whether or not man evolved from an ape-like creature. If you look at the various ape men or the proposed ape men, every one of them falls out of the tree. And as I tell people, if you look at the fossil record, and I'll give you the summary. Number one, you find fossil evidence of apes, you find fossil evidence of men, and you find scientists who monkey around with the evidence. There is no evidence whatsoever for fossil ape men. All of us talk about Neanderthal man. What a lot of people don't understand or don't realize is that a skeleton of Neanderthal man was found buried in chainmail armor in Poland around 1910. That skeleton dated to about the 14th century. Well, Neanderthal man was around in the 14th century. C. Loring Brace from the University of Michigan stated in 1989, Insight magazine, that Neanderthal man is modern Western European. So Neanderthal man is not an ape-like creature. When we talk about Java man, we look at the leg bone of upper thigh bone of a human with the skull cap of an ape. The man who discovered it, Dr. Eugene Dubois, concealed the fact that he had found 3 fully human skulls several miles away, about 60 miles away, in the same layer of rock, which would totally disprove his theory. Well, he knew that, so he buried those skulls under the floorboards of his bed to totally conceal the evidence. Dubois himself admitted before he died that what he had found was just a large orang type creature, just a large ape.
Or possibly, yeah, a giant gibbon.
Yeah. Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, when Cro-Magnon man drew pictures of himself at the cave in Lascaux-les-Châteaux, he drew pictures of himself wearing top hat, having neatly trimmed beards. The women were wearing skirts. So Cro-Magnon man appears to have been a very, very modern individual. He kept an accurate calendar, had a very high degree of social order. His cave art was some of the most beautiful art in the world, and what he did was that he conformed the 3-dimensional outlines of the animal to the 3-dimensional outlines of the cave that he drew on. So he was an artist of incredible skill. The Lucy find is a very interesting find. In reviewing Lucy and the whole story that involved with this alleged ape man, one of the writers who wrote the book The Bone Peddlers, a gentleman by the name of William Fick, said that Lucy strikes a new low in scientific credibility. What a lot of people don't realize is that Dr. Adrian Zillman in New Scientist magazine showed that the skeleton of Lucy is virtually identical to a green forest pygmy chimpanzee. But they don't give you $100,000 research grants to find green forest pygmy chimpanzees. Very plain and simple.
How about the Peking man?
The Peking man, there is no evidence. All of the skulls that allegedly were a part of Peking man were stolen. Peking man has a very interesting story. All they found in this area of China were skulls. They found no body. Well, most apes have a body and a skull. There's something interesting. Let me say this also with Peking man. There are no skulls. There is no evidence that remains. There's plaster of Paris models that were made. But the early descriptions by the people who were right there at the site when these skulls were uncovered all describe small triangular-shaped, monkey-looking skulls, nothing like the skulls that we see now. But all the skulls were stolen. You're not seeing actual representations. I want to emphasize that. Back to Peking Man. The other thing that's interesting is that all the skulls were just skulls, no body, and every skull had been bashed in right at the base. In this area of the world, even today, when people capture a monkey, well, you can't eat monkey meat. You boil monkey meat for a week and the water gets hard. Monkey meat is tough. So what they do is they cut the head off, they throw the skull in a pot of boiling water, take the skull out, bash in the base of the skull, and eat the brains out. That's exactly what we see with Peking Man. We find skulls bashed in from the rear with no body. As several people have said, this isn't man's ancestor, it's man's meal.
Right.
Right. How about the Nebraska man that was used by Spencer Tracy in the movie Inherit the Wind?
1925, Harold Cook found one tooth, and from that one tooth he knew he had found an ape man. Now, when the London Illustrated Times got the story, they not only showed an ape man, they showed his wife, ape mom, I guess you'd call her. From one person they made two people. From one tooth, rather, they made two people. The only problem is that 5 years later, 1929, they found identical teeth hooked to a skull, hooked to a skeleton, and that skeleton was the skeleton of a pig. So we went from man's ancestor to just a pig. And yet that evidence, based upon one single tooth, was alleged proof of man's ancestor.
How about finally this Piltdown man?
Piltdown man was a total fake, total fraud. In 1912, Dr. Charles Dawson, in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England, found a jawbone that appeared to be an ape's jawbone, but the teeth were small, like human teeth. And he also found a skull cap that you couldn't really tell a whole lot about. Well, when the skull cap and the jaw made it to the British Natural History Museum, it was purported to be an ape's jaw with small teeth like a human, so an ape man. Now, that skull and jaw stayed in the British Natural History Museum for almost 40 years. And then in the 1950s, when they started trying to date the skull and the jaw, they found out that not only were the dates drastically different, but someone had intentionally stained the skull and jaw with iron salts to make them look artificially old. And the next thing they noticed was even more dramatic. Someone had taken a metal file and filed those teeth down to make them look artificially small. A total 100% fake. Now, here's the scary part. A dental anatomist, all the way back in 1916, did the initial research for the British Natural History Museum and reported at that time that the teeth had been filed down and that this thing was a fake. His report was suppressed by the people in charge of the British Natural History Museum, and that ape man, which was a fake, was allowed to sit in the British Natural History Museum for 40 years. It just goes to show how far some people will go to support their religious belief. And that's what has caused Lord Sir Zali Zuckerman, who is an evolutionist, to make the comment, if man evolved from an ape-like creature, he did so without leaving a trace of that evidence in the fossil record.
Okay, now what about this argument about ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny?
Recapitulation, the theory of recapitulation was first promoted by Ernst Haeckel back in 1868. In 1874, he was accused of fraudulently drawing and misrepresenting the different stages of the embryo, which showed them to be artificially very similar. Haeckel said that as an embryo matures, it goes through all of its stages of evolution, and that's why embryos look so much alike. They start out as a fish stage with gill slits, and then into a reptile stage with a tail, and finally man becomes man and pig becomes pig. Well, as it turned out, even though Haeckel published that theory in 1868 with the drawings to support it, in 1874 he was accused of fraud, and more importantly, he admitted it. He admitted that his theory was fraudulent, and he was convicted. Now, that theory persists in the textbooks today, even though it's been over 100 years since it's been admitted a fraud. And that's why Sir Gavin de Beer said, seldom has an assertion like that of Haeckel's theory of recapitulation done so much harm to science. And De Beer himself is an evolutionist. That theory is a fraudulent theory. It's still in the textbooks. Finally, it was told to me last week at LSU, and I'll tell you this story, and I'm sorry to take up a little bit of time. I met with a group of students from the Campus Crusade from Christ. A young lady took an evolutionary biology course last semester, dropped the course. At that time, the teacher taught recapitulation as an absolute fact and a proof of evolution because it was in the textbook. This semester, the new textbooks came out, dropped the proof of evolution. She said, hey, Prof, how come they got this theory, how come the theory of recapitulation is not in the textbook this year? He said, oh, well, you have to understand that we haven't believed that from some time. She said, you taught it last semester. So it just goes to prove that a lot of the professors in the school teach the party line, for whatever reason, mainly to protect their job. We also have listed here homology. Homology is the fact that structures look alike. If you look at a bat or a porpoise or a bird or a human, we all have one big bone in the upper arm, two little bones in the lower arm, and 5 digits. And that type of design pattern is repeated in all creatures. That's called homology, look-alike. There's a big problem with homology. Homology can either be due to getting this characteristics from a common ancestor, which means that we had to get it through genetics, which means we had to get it through DNA, or homology can also mean that an intelligent creator used a similar plan to accomplish a similar purpose using a similar design as confined by the laws of chemistry and physics in the same universe. When I look at the 2 bridges over the Mississippi River in New Orleans, I don't think that one bridge evolved from the other, even though they're perfect replicas. What that shows is an intelligent creator. So homology can be one or the other, but there's a test that we can do. If homology is due to a common ancestor, it's due to heredity, and homologous body parts, look-alike body parts, have to occur in the same areas in the DNA. In other words, homologous body parts must come from homologous genes. Do they? What Sir Gavin De Beer showed in his monograph was that rarely, if ever, do homologous body parts occur in homologous genes. In fact, even when we look at the embryos, homologous body parts hardly ever occur in homologous areas of a developing embryo. And that's why Sir Alistair Hardy said, homology is absolutely fundamental to what we are talking about when we speak of evolution. However, we cannot explain it at all in terms of present-day biological theory. Homology is one of the greatest disproofs of evolution. Look-alike body structures hardly ever occur on look-alike genes, hardly ever occur in the same areas of the embryo. And as Sir Gavin De Beer asked, listen, if you look at your leg has one big bone in the upper leg, 2 little bones in the lower leg, and 5 digits. Do you think your legs evolved from your arms? Or did the arms evolve from the legs? Homology fails at every area except if it's an intelligent creator using that optimal design through the same plan to accomplish a similar purpose. That fits homology, not evolution.
Very good.
Very good.
Okay, as time flies, as I keep saying, we're trying to get as many points in as possible. And we've touched on this in previous programs, but just recapitulate.
Okay.
Couldn't resist that. The thermodynamics, the second law, and you've already touched on some physics when you were talking about amino acids and these other things, but just briefly if you could.
Okay. The second law of thermodynamics, as it applies to information theory, says you can't get more information than what you start with. You can't get more than what you already got. So if I'm going to get this much information, it has to come from a source with at least that much information. It also says that over a period of time, I will lose information. My information will become less ordered. The second law of thermodynamics says that I could never, ever start with molecules that have no information and build into living organisms that have a lot of information in their DNA. The probability of that occurring was calculated by an evolutionist, Dr. Morowitz, considered one of the greatest physical chemists in the world. He said the probability that one E. coli bacteria would evolve any place in the universe in 5 billion years is 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power. You heard right. 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power. That's a 1 with 100 billion zeros behind it. The national debt is $4 trillion. I guess depending on what time of the day it is, it's between $4 and $5 trillion, and that's only a 1 with 12 zeros. Now here's the incredible thing. This is 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power for evolution to have ever occurred one time to produce not us, but an E. coli bacteria, and yet Morowitz believes that that's true. That's faith. That's blind faith.
And that's religious faith.
That's religious faith, much more than what I have.
In fact, you've almost answered the next point on the chart here about the laws of probability.
Let me just pick up on it. Sir Fred Hoyle said that the probability that life forms have evolved this way is equal to the chance of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard, fully assembling a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. And Hoyle is an optimist. He says the chance is only 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. So Hoyle is much more optimistic than Morowitz. The probability statistics show us how absolutely absurd this all is. And remember, Emile Borel, he's a French mathematician, statistician, considered an expert in the field, said that if you exceed a probability of 10 to the 1 chance in 10 to the 45th power, or 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power, you are dealing with events that will never, ever be observed to occur any place in the universe by a human observer. He said, now, if you want to deal with events every place in the universe that don't require a human observer, then you've got a chance that once you get above a chance of 1 chance in 10 to the 200th power, then that event could never, ever occur at any time in the universe ever. And we're dealing with probabilities of 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th, 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Well, according to Borel, those events exceed the natural laws of probability. And if you're looking at something that you believe that exceeds the natural laws of probability, then it's no longer natural, it's supernatural. The evolutionist is forced to believe in the supernatural. He is the most religious person I know.
Excellent.
And his own science condemns him. Let me just say that.
That's right.
It's been argued, oh, well, the laws of probability don't hold. I want to remind you, the laws of probability is what makes quantum mechanics work. If we do away with the laws of probability, especially in large numbers, then we have to dismiss all of quantum mechanics. We have to assume that Las Vegas went out of business a long time ago. The laws of probability is what keeps Las Vegas in business. So the laws of probability are real, they do work, and we see them experimentally function every day.
Excellent, excellent. All right, and moving right along, of course you brought up many problems for evolutionists, and some of them seem to try to get away from that with coming up with other theories and ideas, such as Goldschmidt's hopeful monster theory, and of course there's other people talking about directed transpermia or something along those that we actually came here from space aliens from another planet, because they can't see any evolution here. They figure, well, of course, we got here some other way.
Who made the space aliens?
That's right.
You can put the problem out in outer space.
Yeah, it just moves the problem away from
people
you.
won't think about it, but you do have to say, well, who made the space aliens?
Exactly. So what do you have to say?
And that's exactly it. We haven't come up with a theory of origins. What we've just done is pushed it back further to another planet. And the reason why they're coming up with these theories, people like Sir Fred Hoyle and Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick, the reason why they're talking about space aliens and panspermia, that life came from outer space, is because the laws of chemistry and physics just will not allow life to evolve here, and they're willing to admit it. Fred Hoyle, who came up with the quote about the tornado sweeping through a junkyard, went through a very long mathematical procedure with Chandrawik Ramashan to prove that life could not evolve here on Earth. Said the laws of chemistry and physics and the probability that you can put on those laws just does not allow for the evolution of life here on Earth. So they've recognized that. This hopeful monster theory, Goldschmidt back in the 20s said, listen, let's be good scientists. We've been digging in the fossil record and there are no transitional forms. He was a geneticist. He said what we know about genetics does not allow for one type of creature to gradually change into another type of creature. The evidence is missing in the fossil record. Let's be honest and say that what we had to do is one day have a reptile laying an egg and have a furry mammal-type creature come out of it. That's what Goldschmidt believed, that you had to have a complete change genetically within one individual, within that one generation. And remember now, in higher creatures, it had to happen twice. You had to have two miracles occur, a male miracle and a female miracle. And that's why it was called the hopeful monster theory. Now, Stephen Jay Gould tried to reach a compromise with Eldridge and come up with this idea of punctuated equilibrium, in which he said the proof of his theory was the fact that there was no proof, which is brilliant if you ask me. That's like saying that my theory is that elephants only fly when they're invisible, and the proof of my theory is that no one's ever seen an invisible elephant flying, which proves a theory. So punctuated equilibrium is just a way to try to get around it, but Gould himself said that he believes that in the end, Goldschmidt's hopeful monster theory will prove to be correct. That's blind faith. That bears very little resemblance to science. What it does sound like is where the princess kisses the frog and it instantaneously turns into a prince. That you can sell that to a 4-year-old, but it shouldn't be sold to a college student who's paying good money to believe in the absolutely ridiculous and the absurd. The hopeful monster theory is nonsense, and the space aliens is really not an answer.
That sounds like if a woman goes to a maternity ward, she gives birth, and out comes a carrier pigeon. That's basically what it's saying.
That's basically what they're saying.
Okay. Well, with that, let's go on to the dating methods briefly. We have carbon-14, potassium, argon, all are radiometric dating techniques. And surely this proves that the Earth is billions and billions of years old, and that just blows you creationist guys right out of the water.
Well, you know, it's incredible. Regardless of how old the Earth is or is not, it doesn't prove that anything evolved from anything else. But let me say this. The evolutionist needs billions of years. Billions of years is not enough time for evolution to occur. Back to Morowitz's quote, given 5 billion years, any place in the universe just to form one E. coli bacteria, the probability is still 1 chance in 10 to the 100 billionth power. So time, billions of years is not enough time for the evolutionist, but he needs those billions of years. Time is the god of evolution, and that's why they constantly bring up this idea of enormous amounts of time. And again, carbon-14 is one of the interesting points. People so often come to me and say, well, Dr. Gerard, carbon-14 has dated those rocks to be hundreds of millions or billions of years old. How do you deal with that? Whoa, carbon-14 does not date rocks. Carbon-14 only dates things that have organic material in them, things that were once alive. Carbon-14, like a teenager only dates things that look like they were once alive. It's the same thing with carbon-14. Carbon-14 is only good for things that have organic material. Now, the second thing about carbon-14 is that it's only good for thousands of years, at the most 50,000 years. Many people don't believe that carbon-14 is any good past 5,000 or 6,000 years. So carbon-14 is not a good billion-year measuring device. It's not a billion-year-old measuring device anyway. But you know what you never hear about carbon-14? You never hear about this measuring aspect of carbon-14. Carbon-14 is formed in the atmosphere by the sun's by radiation from the sun, by cosmic bombardment. It would take about 15,000 years for the atmosphere to become fully saturated with carbon-14 at its equilibrium state. Not that all the carbon would be carbon-14, but to reach its equilibrium state would take about 15,000 years. However, based upon NASA's own data, carbon-14 is only 75% of its equilibrium state, which means that carbon-14 date on the atmosphere would indicate that it's only been being formed in the atmosphere for about 11,000 years. It's only a 75% towards equilibrium. That carbon-14 date puts an absolute limit on the atmosphere of about 11,000 years. Not saying it's that age, it couldn't be any older than that. Or let's say it this way, carbon-14 only began being formed about 11,000 years ago. And the man who won the Nobel Prize for the carbon-14 dating method, Libby, knew that and chose to ignore it. But that's something that cannot be ignored. That carbon-14 date is never brought up, nor does anyone discuss the dinosaur bones that have been discovered, that still have organic material in them, that have been dated anywhere from 9,900 all the way out to 20,000 years using carbon-14. Well, wait a minute. If those dinosaurs died millions of years ago, all the carbon-14 should have decayed, and those dinosaur bones should have never been dated using carbon-14 methods, and yet they were. And that can be verified with the Radiocarbon Journal, where those dates are published. Carbon-14 does not give us old dates. But what about the dating methods that do give us old dates? Uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium. Any dating method or any measuring device is only as good as it is accurate. Now, when we use these old-age dating methods like potassium argon to date rocks, what we are dating is the time when that rock went from a liquid state to a solid state. Have we ever seen rocks go from a liquid state to a solid state? Certainly, we've seen various volcanic rock that has gone from a liquid to a solid state. When we go and date those rocks to test how accurate the rubidium-strontium method is, we get incredible numbers. The 200-year-old lava flow at Kilauea was dated to be 22 million years old. That's not an accurate measuring device at all. The lava flow from Honolulu, Hawaii, was dated anywhere from 160 million to 1.6 billion years old. Well, now, wait a minute. These are rocks that are in the neighborhood of 200 years old, giving us dates anywhere from 20 million to 1.6 billion years old. What does that tell me about the accuracy of this dating method? It tells me that it's nonsense. It just cannot be used. It's not reliable. But we do have rocks that we do know how old they are, and those rocks just don't date. It's interesting that the rocks, the lava flow at the top of the Grand Canyon, radiometrically, using these dating methods, dates to be older than the rocks at the bottom of the canyon, which of course nobody believes. So the radiometric dating methods all have their problems, various problems involved with them. These various elements that were, like in potassium argon, argon is a gas and it leaks out of rock, especially hot rock. We find with uranium-lead dating methods and rubidium-strontium dating methods, the rubidium, the strontium, the uranium, the lead are very water-soluble. If they've been sitting there for hundreds of millions or billions of years, water's leaked through those rocks and it's washed some in or it's washed some out. We really don't know how much that has changed. The lead that's found in those rocks is changed from lead 206 to 207 to 208 by neutron bombardment. So we get all of these different values. We don't really know that we've ever had a closed system when we do the radiometric dating methods. That's why if you just read the Encyclopedia Britannica, you get statements like this. Now, this is the Encyclopedia Britannica. Even these guys are not convinced of how good these dating methods are, in spite of the fact that they're called absolute dating methods. Listen to this, Encyclopedia Britannica, 15th edition, volume 19. Quote, "The physical records used in absolute time measurement leave much to be desired in the way of completeness and clarity." Well, if you're an absolute time measurement and you leave much to be desired in completeness and clarity, then you're not an absolute time measuring device. Talking about uranium lead, quote, "Unfortunately, such checks have painted a generally gloomy picture for those seeking a chronometric tool," unquote. That doesn't sound like a good time measuring device, and it doesn't seem like there's much confidence here. Potassium argon, quote, "The two main problems that plague potassium argon dating are like those of the uranium lead method. The rubidium strontium method is not without its problems." All the dating methods have many, many problems. The thing that amazes me is that no one ever talks about the young Earth dating methods, which are far more numerous and require far fewer assumptions. The retention of helium in these rocks, Precambrian granites and zircon crystals, within 6,000 years, all of that helium would have been forced out of that rock. And yet when the U.S. government dug core samples for that rock, they found tremendous amount of helium. So where did the helium come from? Those rocks aren't any older than 6,000 years old. The helium in the Earth's atmosphere, that helium comes from the radioactive decay of uranium and various other elements, thorium. All of that helium in the Earth's atmosphere would be put there within a 15,000-year period. And on and on and on. Many young Earth dating methods that no one ever addresses. Far more numerous than the old Earth dating methods and far more accurate with regard to far fewer assumptions. And I didn't mean to get all off on dating methods, but I think that's important.
Yeah, it is important. I know that some of the old Earth dating techniques have been used on even living bugs and things, and they came up with just fantastic.
Carbon-14 will give, they dated a dead seal that had been just recently killed, and they got, I want to say, several million-year date on it. So
yeah.
Carbon-14 is not the best dating method.
And some of these other ones as well. I'm thinking of the Murchison meteorite in '69 and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, we're running rapidly out of time. We've got about 7 minutes left here. We're getting to one of our most fascinating subjects here, dinosaurs. Do what you can, Doctor. I don't know if we're going to get through this whole list here, but dinosaurs, that is absolute evidence and proof that evolution had to have occurred.
And again, in Job chapter 40, verses 15 and 17, it talks about behemoth, an animal with a tail like a cedar tree. The only animal who fits that description is really a dinosaur. In Job chapter 41, it talks about Leviathan. These are gigantic animals that do fit the description of dinosaurs. Where did the dinosaurs come from? God created them, very, very simply. The evolutionist has no answer for the origin of dinosaurs. They admit that in the literature, that there's no evolutionary links between the dinosaurs that have the reptile hip bone and the bird-like hip bone. So the origin of dinosaurs is a mystery for the evolutionists. For the creationists, it's easy. God was there, God saw it, God created it. Eyewitness reports, as you were reading in Creation Ex Nihilo, about people who have seen dinosaurs. Dr. Roy Mackal in 1980 claims to have seen a brontosaur-type dinosaur. Various people who have reported eyewitness accounts. The picture of the plesiosaur caught off the coast of New Zealand in 1977, probably what the Loch Ness Monster is. Many, many examples that dinosaurs probably aren't
But they
extinct.
never could have got them on Noah's Ark.
Oh, certainly they could have gotten dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. All they would have done is taken the babies on Noah's Ark, and that would have been very, very simple. Small dinosaurs. As I said,
They wouldn't have taken a 50-ton dinosaur?
that would have been really dumb. They would have taken a very small baby dinosaur, easy to get on Noah's Ark. Wouldn't, as one kid told me, would not have had to lower it with a helicopter.
Most dinosaurs I've heard is small anyway, and they're just big lizards. But the flood explains why we have so many dinosaur fossils, because of rapid burial. And so what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, the flood wiped them out, the Bible tells us, and we can assume from that that the atmosphere changed and they just died off. Some are still around. It fits with young Earth evidences, not with the millions of years. But here's what the world comes up with. I got this when I was in Moscow this summer. It comes out of Moscow Tribune. It says that, it just states as a fact that the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago was caused by a meteor crash. And I'd just like to have Dr. Gerard comment on that. What do you think about that? That actual scientists believe that a meteor crashed and all the dust blocked out the sun's light and killed off the dinosaurs.
And that's so incredible because, let's face it, plants need sunlight a lot more than dinosaurs do. And it's amazing that it would have selectively killed the dinosaurs and not all the other creatures and not all the plants. And remember, mammals are much more dependent upon sunlight to convert vitamin D than are reptiles. So that theory just doesn't hold. And again, why selectively kill the dinosaurs? That's basically nonsense. From a creationist standpoint, if there was a water vapor or an ice canopy surrounding the Earth prior to the flood, a meteor could have initiated the flood, collapsing that canopy and spreading out dust, but it would not have selectively killed one group of animals, and that really just begs common sense.
I had one quick question on this. Dinosaurs, they're basically reptiles, is that correct?
They are classified as reptiles. They are fully reptiles.
Now, do some reptiles just continue to grow?
All reptiles continue to grow throughout their lifespan, so that if prior to the flood, the Bible tells us that humans live to be 900 years old, if dinosaurs and reptiles live to be 900 years old, you could expect very, very large reptiles.
I've heard of giant crocodiles, like in, down in Florida.
In Florida and in Australia, they talk about the crocodiles that get to be 20 and 30 feet. Those are tremendous sea crocodiles.
And they probably haven't lived for 900 years.
I promise you they haven't.
Okay, well, with that, we're almost out of time. I'd like to let the people know at home, we've got on the chart, we still have questions like the continental drift, the ice ages, the different races of people. How could animals get to Australia? We've already explained the gap theory in a previous show. We already talked some about Noah's flood.
Let me do this. Let me just give a real quick answer to all of those, if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Continental drift, that theory was first proposed by a Christian creation geologist in 1859, the same year Darwin published his book, because reading Genesis, he saw that there appeared to be one landmass. Another Christian geologist in the 1920s proposed it again, noticing that the continents somewhat fit together, and this has now become the darling of the secular geologists. This didn't start with them, this started with us, and it may coincide with the biblical statement about Peleg, that in his day the earth was divided. The ice age is the problem for the evolutionists with the ice age is how do you get enough warm water to evaporate very quickly? Cold summers don't do it, and cold air does not hold enough water to form an ice age. You just can't get enough snow. To form an ice age, you need hot water evaporating quickly and snowing rapidly, regardless of what the summers do. So to get an ice age, you need a lot of hot water. Best way to get a lot of hot water? is after a flood. Different races of people, what we mean by races are the different skin colors. Different skin colors are caused just by the 4 genes that control skin color. And with the right combination of those genes, you get a range of skin colors. It's more interesting to see the evolutionists describe how those races occur. Why do we find just dark-skinned people in Africa, India, and Australia, and light-skinned people in Scandinavia? Well, it's simple genetics. Whenever we find isolated genetic traits, isolated physical traits, it's always because we've isolated whatever organism there is so that they can only marry or only breed with organisms just like themselves. The best way to isolate people is by language, which would have occurred after the Tower of Babel. Distant starlight, February 1993, Sky and Telescope magazine shows from a relativity standpoint that this redshift is not due to a Doppler effect and does not prove an age-old universe. And now we're out of time.
Well, we still have a little bit here. We're going to go.
Animals to Australia,
Go ahead.
crossed on a land bridge, or they could have been brought by the travelers, which is just what the Aborigines say. We did discuss the gap theory.
What happened to all the water?
All the water went in the seas. God said that he pushed the ocean basins down, raised the land up. So that's where the water went. Cain's wife, Genesis 5:4, Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. Bad things come about because Adam goofed up. Adam sinned. Adam brought it in. And is Genesis cultural symbolism? Absolutely not. It's too much coincidence to see all those different cultures with the same story. If you went into court and everybody had the same story from different cultures, you'd say the story must be true. Not that everybody's crazy.
All right, we're already into the red zone for having time. Dale, if you could take 20 seconds to make a concluding statement, and then Dr. Gerard, just very quickly.
Basically, we've gone over the evidence. The question you need to ask yourself is, why does the world suppress the evidence against evolution and for creationism? And the answer is in the Bible, that man is a sinner and is separated from God. And our only hope is to give our lives to Jesus Christ and have that fellowship restored with God. Otherwise, you'll die in your sins and spend eternity in hell. Let the facts speak for themselves.
All right, Dr. Gerard, final comment?
The facts are overwhelming. If anybody wants to take the time to look at the facts, they will thoroughly disprove evolution, and there's no reason to continue to believe in evolution because of the scientific value. If you do, it's just based upon a religious hope.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us and watching this show on Creation Science versus the Myth of Evolution. I'm Larry Wessels with Dale Deloney for Peaceway Publications, or Peaceway Productions, sorry about that, and Dr. Michael Gerard from the Institute for Creation Research. Please check into the information that we've presented. There's many books, tapes, and videos available. Call or write. We'll be glad to help you in any way we can. God bless you very much. Bye-bye.
Check out our websites. BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available.